Um, okay, so the next thing we're going to cover is making selections. Now, for me, I have a background in photography. When I was an undergrad, I was a photography and sculpture major. And back then, this is going to date me. This was pre-digital. We worked in the darkroom, which is great fun, by the way. If you ever want to take a photo class and work in the darkroom, it's a lot of fun. A lot of fun chemicals and stuff to play with. Um, but when we wanted to manipulate images, we had to do this dance. So we had, you have what's called an enlarger, right? Which you put your negative in, and then you have your piece of paper, which is down below it on the table. And you shine the light through the negative, and it projects that light onto the paper and exposes the paper. And then you put the paper in the chemicals that you develop it to make your print. So when you wanted to do something like make a portion of your image a little darker, well, you needed more light to hit that part of the paper. Okay, you needed less light to hit one other part of the paper. If you wanted to double expose things, you would change, you would make a little mask or something to mask out part of one of the negatives and project it on top of the other thing. And it's really complicated. It's pretty fun. It's complicated. And you would do this kind of dance where you're kind of moving your hand around to kind of cut back the amount of light that hits one part of the paper. It was really interesting. But the revolution for somebody like me when you get into Photoshop is the fact that you can make very detailed, very specific selections and do something to just that portion of the image, right? That's revolutionary. It doesn't seem revolutionary now, but that's revolutionary. That and the idea of working in layers. Those are kind of the two big Photoshop things. So my kind of tenet when you're working in Photoshop is that if you can select something, you can do anything you want to. You can get rid of it. You can make it different. You can change it. You can turn it around. So the kind of the base operation you really need to get a hang of is making a selection on something. So that's going to be a big part of everything we're doing. You've got to be able to make a selection. Now, selections are finicky. They're complex. They're nuanced. There's a lot of ways you can do it. As we move farther into the 21st century, computers are taking over more of the grunt work of making selections. You're going to find that there's a lot of programs on your phone, a lot of oddball little image editing programs where you can sort of swipe your finger over something and it'll remove the background. That's the computer, that's artificial intelligence, algorithms kind of deciding what that it thinks you want it to remove. So the computer's kind of taking the initiative there. You're guiding it, but it's taking the initiative. Photoshop does some of that, but it gives you much more control. Remember, this is a program where you have control over every facet of what it's doing. So it has that same technology in it, but it's much more under your control. Okay. That said, it could take a lot longer, but usually the results are better. All right. So how do we make a selection? You should note that here I'm going to step back and start with this image, but just to get back to where I was before, I'm going to click back to the open in the history window. And I'm going to zoom in on this image. I'm going to use a certain number of shortcut keys in this class. I don't use a lot, but I have a few core ones. So I don't require you guys to learn every keyboard shortcut, but you're going to want to learn a certain set. And zoom is probably the biggest one. All right, and all you do is hold the Z key. Right, and that changes the pointer to the magnifying glass. Then you're going to click, drag, and sometimes it gets away from you.
So you just click Z?
You hold Z, you got to hold it down. Then you're going to click and drag right and left. Okay? And then if you unclick you let off the mouse before you let the Z key off. Well, you see what happened. If I just tap the Z key, it just changes it to that. Does that make sense? So if I have another tool up, if I wanted to zoom and then go back to that tool, I hold the Z key down, I drag, unclick my mouse, and then let the finger up on the thing. So you're going to find that as you develop your workflow, you'll kind of get into a rhythm of what you want to do. And sometimes you don't. Sometimes you just click on everything. And that's fine. If you don't want to start to mess around, if it's not working, just come over here. The magnifying glass is down towards the bottom of the toolbar. You just click on that. You can zoom and then go back and click on your other tools. You know, the one useful thing about the new MacBook Pros with the touch bar at the top, if you happen to have one of those, is that you can use your touch bar to move that stuff too. I don't use it. I got one of those things. I don't use it very much. So I zoom like this. Other things I can do are go to View and Fit on Screen. You're going to see if I wanted to do that with a keyboard shortcut, if I use it a lot, I might remember that by going up, looking at the keyboard shortcut, which is Command 0 on the keyboard. I can't remember that. If I don't use this stuff it's like your names. If I don't use your names all the time, I don't learn them. But if I use them every day, it sticks. And I am not an everyday Photoshop user. I'm an everyday college professor. So. All right, so I have my image here. Now, how do I make a selection? I'm going to go through the basics, what these tools do, and then I'll kind of show you some use cases for them, okay? Now remember, the selection tools are up towards the top of your toolbar. All right, so this one is the Move tool. That one we'll use in a minute, but these three right below it are your selection tools, okay? So let's start with the Marquee tool. Just for your knowledge, Marquee refers to it's a little hard to see at this resolution. It refers to like around a movie theater sign with the little blinking lights. That's the Marquee, right? So this is the Marquee tool, and if you look real close, you can see that it has that little dashed line that's moving. That's also referred to as the marching ants. So what that tells me is that's the selection. Okay, that's what is selected. That sounds obvious, but what that means is that when I pick another tool out, like a paintbrush, okay, and if I paint in this image, I'm only going to affect what is selected. Okay, you can see what happened when I drag my paintbrush out of there. It stops exactly at that Marquee tool, the edge of that Marquee. So that is my selection. All right, and that's what I mean by if you can select it, you can modify it. So that's kind of the key there. So let's take a look at what these do. So a rectangular selection. I'm going to go make a new image here. I'm going to fill this. This will be a little easier to see. Fill this with like a green. Is that a little easier to see? Yeah. So here, my selection now is a rectangle. Okay. Oh, man, you really messed with my eyes going back and forth from the projector to the monitor. Okay, so you notice that I made my rectangular selection, and if I move my cursor inside, it changes to the arrow with the little marquee around it. So this little thing right here indicates that I'm inside a selection. So I have an arrow. That's a move tool, actually. And thing. If I click and drag, I can move that selection around. All right. If I come outside of the selection, it changes back to the crosshairs. And if I click again, I'm going to lose my original selection. And I'll end up with a new selection. you can see it's kind of the resolution of the monitor kind of loses a little bit of that information there. So move, click and drag makes a new one.
But they want to make multiple selections.
I'm going to get to that.
Oh,
But let me go through the other tools first, and then we'll come back and how to modify those. All right. Now, if I come down and I click below, I get my elliptical selection tool. All right. That's really hard to see it. Here, let me do something.